Welcome to this audio and video cast from Britten Pears Arts. I'm Lucy Walker, and this is the first in a short series of conversations about two operas coming up in September and October, The Blue Woman and The Rape of Lucretia. And these two operas both address the subject of sexual violence against women on stage across nearly 8 decades. And the conversations and the types of productions have changed hugely over that period and how it is explored artistically. So that will be part of this conversation, as well as the question of what effect such subject matter has on audiences, on the performers, on the production team in general, and what responsibilities artists and organisations have towards everybody involved. And so we will be covering some challenging topics here. I'm really thrilled to be joined by Laura Bowler, the composer of The Blue Woman, which had its premiere just a few weeks ago in July, and by Sarah Bardwell, Executive Director of Britten Pears Arts. Welcome to you both. And Laura, congratulations on your brilliant work, The Blue Woman, which will be coming to Snape in September. It's a remarkable and very beautiful piece in and of itself, but also as part of this decades and centuries long conversation. I thought it was fascinating to see it within that context as well. So just to start with, how did it come about?
Yeah, it was quite a long journey actually coming about. So I'd always had this desire to make a work about this subject matter purely because of the depiction of sexual violence and the treatment of women, the woman as victim in the operatic canon. And being someone who has been to see many operas, this was something that I was constantly experiencing when I was going to see various operas from the canon. And so I kind of approached Snape and said, okay, I really would like to create a work that's around this subject matter. I'm not really sure how that will manifest yet. It's like kind of a very rough, loose idea. I don't know whether I'll perform it or not perform it and that kind of thing. And I originally came and we did some workshops on what this might manifest as, and it went on a really long journey, the work did. It started in a place that was very different to where it ended as a work, for lots of different reasons, but a lot of it was due to what I learnt going through the process of trying to make a work about this subject matter and the conversations that I had with various people, the research that I did. I have possibly one of the largest libraries on this subject matter. And then I got to a point in it where I decided to take kind of 9 months of reflection on, okay, how am I going to proceed with this? And during that time, I was really fortunate enough that Britten Pears Arts supported me in going to the Women Opera Makers course with Katie Mitchell in Aix-en-Provence. And I had a conversation with Katie about it, and I said, okay, so I'm trying to make this work. I'm not really sure how it's going to manifest, and I'm not really sure who the right team will be. And Katie said to me, oh, why don't you ask me to direct it? And I was like, okay. Because she is the obvious choice for this work because of the work that she makes. She is the perfect choice for this work. And so I kind of was like in this state of shock. And then I went away and that night and I was thinking about it, pondering it. And then I came back the next day of the workshop and said to Katie, I said, so if I was to ask you, would you say yes? Would you do it? And she was like, yes, I'll do it. So she came on board, and then after that, she introduced me to Laura Lomas, who is the librettist for The Blue Woman. And we went on this very long process, Laura and I, of essentially doing huge amounts of research, having many, many conversations about the subject matter. And then Laura kind of took all of those conversations, all of that research, and, wrote. And what came out, and then it was a matter of kind of refining that alongside Katie. But the key thing for us right from the beginning was to make a work that didn't in any way try to represent what the act of sexual violence is on stage. That was a key thing. We didn't want to, there was a very strong political decision that by reenacting, we are perpetuating the problem. So we focused on essentially what happens psychologically to survivors of sexual violence, and focused on the kind of the fragmentation of the female psyche. And the way that manifested in Laura's libretto was we follow this woman who sees and encounters many other women who are kind of other women, but also part of herself and the fragmented self. And we follow her on this journey of kind of there's memories and then looking forward and searching for the person that she was before, essentially. And we get to a point in the piece where, she finds that person, and it's about then the next stage that happens after the opera, I suppose. Yeah. So, yeah.
Can I just going back to sort of the genesis of it, the very so you had this idea at some point, and then when you developed it, did you came and did a residency at St Maltings?
Yes.
So you didn't know, you knew what the idea was. You
yes.
had the idea before you came, and then how long did you spend?
So I think I did two residencies here, so a week and then another week.
Okay.
And it was. Yeah, it was, and at that point as well, we had a consultant on board who was working with us, who was someone that had worked with rape crisis as well, okay. Which was hugely beneficial in terms of, the research and understanding of the subject matter. And it was always about navigating, like, how do you make a work about this? How do you make a work safely about this? How do you make a work that communicates what you want it to communicate without it being in any way kind of representational or, any sort of glamorization or depiction in that sense. And it's really tricky to navigate that. And it was a long process to figure out how we could do that and what point in the process of the psychological experience of women was the right point of the process to kind of try and investigate artistically.
So the two Snape residencies happened before the connection with Katie and that.
Yeah.
So it was there. It just had, but it was, as you say, it's completely different. So how was it different? What was that sort of starting point?
So I think that starting point for me was figuring out, this, you can have like this kernel of an idea that you want to make something about a subject matter, but more than any other subject matter, this one feels so vulnerable and so delicate, fragile, and also, there's a huge weight of responsibility tackling this subject matter. And there's a huge context as well to which it exists in, both, in terms of the operatic world, but also in terms of real life experience. And so it was about kind of investigating, one, whether it was something, because I'm also a performer, whether it was something that I also wanted to perform or not, and what that would mean for the work or not mean for the work. Also, what scale the work would be. Would it be a solo performance work? Would it be multiple women? What would it mean if it was multiple women? What does it mean for it to have naturalistic staging or not naturalistic staging? All of those kind of questions were things that I was thinking about. And I kind of got to a stage where almost like, I don't really know. Like I did 2 residencies and I thought about it so much and read so many books that I was kind of like, okay, I need to reflect. So I did very consciously.
That was the 9-month period that you
I took a very, very clear decision to reflect on what I'd been through in the 2 residencies. And it was at that point that I kind of spoke to Katie and we had conversations about it. And then we had conversations with Laura and then it developed from there. Yeah.
Just in terms of the what became the eventual staging. Mm-hmm. So it's 4 women and then 4 cellists sort of seated behind them in this blue set, and then a film projection above. How involved were you in that those artistic choices for the presumably the instrumentation? Because and I was intrigued about why cellists. So perhaps that would be really interesting to find out. But the actual physical the logistics of it plus the film as well.
I was very involved in it. I'm sure Katie would say, if she was here, that I gave her very few things to be able to work with, because once you stick four vocalists on stage and 4 cellists, there's really not very much room left for working around it. Yeah, so right from kind of the beginning of once the idea started to kind of solidify, I knew that I wanted the instrumentalist to be on stage. It's a really key part of my practice anyway. Because I'm really interested in the physicality of performance. And so the theatre of instrumental playing, not just the sound. And obviously the cello is a particularly physical instrument. And also the nature of the body of the cello is also symbolic of the female body as well. So it was both a kind of a musical and a theatrical choice to have the 4 cellists on stage. And it's also really good as a composer to give yourself restrictions. So having that restricted sound world, which can be both disparate as 4 players, but can also be one homogeneous whole, was very useful dramaturgically in terms of what we set on with the narrative and how we were kind of exploring the subject matter. And also, like, the cello is just my favourite instrument. So
and it gives you so much potential.
Yeah, it's an incredible instrument to write for. And then it was about, obviously finding the right players for the work, because they would be present on stage, not in the pit. And it was really important to find players that were very comfortable with that, with being at the centre of a theatrical production, and also players that would be happy to kind of work in that collaborative environment, which was a joyous experience. And I have to say that, like, working with all of the cellists was one of the most rich experiences I've ever had. They were just completely amazing. So I feel very lucky.
But where does that make you think? So obviously the production that we're doing in September is the same production.
Yes.
So it won't look different. But I assume you want to have another production of it at some point, don't you? You want it to go and have its life.
Yes.
And if have you literally got those restrictions? The cellos have to be on stage.
Yeah, so the cellists have to be on stage. That is absolutely a restriction. I've not depicted what layout they have to be in. So obviously in this particular production, they're in a line. There are many formats that you could lay them out depending on the size of stage, etc., and the kind of venue that they're in. But it's absolutely essential that they are present, because there are things written into the score that are actually silent and the playing, but they are doing physical work on the instrument. So obviously that would be lost. And there was always the discussion as well as to whether we put the percussionist on the stage as well, Angela. And it was obviously with the percussion setup, particularly this percussion setup, and also how busy she was, it might be quite distracting to have her present on stage. But you never know, like in certain venues, that could be something that would work in the future. Who knows?
I thought that one of the most powerful parts of the piece was that kind of everything all at the same time. So this kind of you're witnessing in a obviously in linear time, but the narrative isn't linear, and the music doesn't feel linear, and there's these offstage sounds that you don't even quite know sometimes where they're coming from. So having the percussionist off stage all contributed to that, and it just did seem to create this kind of piling up of emotional experiences that absolutely you could see was what was being encountered by the Blue Woman and the other women there. That they were representing at the same time contradictory feelings or difficult feelings, and then moments of repose, but then it got crowded out again. And I thought that was one of the really powerful elements of the piece, which then obviously manifested in the staging too. It was a very conscious choice to kind of have that sense of overwhelm and fragmentation in the score, and also in the writing, as representative of obviously the emotional experience post sexual trauma. And also obviously there's the incorporation of electronics in it, which has this element of sometimes dehumanizing as well, and then going back to the pure voice and then away from it, fragmenting the voice and losing the clarity of the voice, and then going back to the clarity of the voice is all part of that kind of emotional headspace, that psychological headspace. And having the film involved in it with a real life, very realistic, very kind of recognisable kind of landscape as well, brought that into presumably the relation, the way people can relate to it, because it just becomes like this is me. This is a person I know. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
And the film choice made by Grant Gee, who's a longtime collaborator of Katie's. That was very much their decision of what that would depict and how it would be depicted. I was obviously part of the conversation, but I think it was a really important anchor for people to, exactly find that person that they can just hold on to, essentially, throughout the work.
Yeah.
But I assume future productions might not.
Yeah,
do
they
that.
might not. Yeah, because that isn't part of the score.
Yeah, just checking.
Yeah, like them, there doesn't have to be a film. There could be a film, but I'm very interested in film on stage anyway, which is part of the reason why Katie and I and Grant decided to do it with this particular production.
It also just seemed to have something to say to all the amount of the depictions of sexual violence on screen. I mean, in TV,
Absolutely.
it's an absolute staple,
Yeah.
it seems, and in film as well. So it did seem to sort of be participating in that.
Yeah, there's also there's a stage direction in the libretto, and because obviously the way it was staged, it was non-naturalistic, but there was a stage direction in it where it refers to that, and it's kind of it gives this long description of we see images from media, etc. And TV and film and footage and things like that. And so that was also something that fed into that decision of how do we have that element that's in the libretto somehow in the production without it being as kind of explicit naturalism, essentially.
Sarah, I just wanted to bring in to kind of broaden out slightly. So the staging of these two works, the Blue Woman and Rape of Lucretia, over a couple of months, the conversations that have been happening in the wider world, so post Me Too, post the Sarah Everard, that appalling situation, post lockdown with so many descriptions of domestic violence, and the statistics, I think it's in the program book, with 1 in 5 women will be sexually assaulted. So this is something that is very present. And for an organisation to stage these works and then to be writing the promotional copy and to be doing the advertising for it, and it strikes me as someone who used to work for this organisation as well, that even just 4 or 5 years ago, we might have been talking about these things very differently. It seems that, and rightly so, the conversation has evolved and changed. What is that like to be writing that copy, to be having that, promoting these works?
Yeah, and it is really challenging, because now I wouldn't say the Rape of Lucretia without a sort of qualifying, whether that's painful, terrifying, difficult. In fact, I was writing exactly that sentence about 3 days ago, and you do have to be really, really aware of it. But I think it isn't something that we shouldn't therefore not do, because of course art is completely about reflecting society and what's going on. But it is fascinating, the change. I mean, even personally, I have 2 daughters, and it must have been 2019, I took them to see a production of Rigoletto, and I hadn't even really thought about it. No, I've seen it, I just go. And I remember sitting there going, oh, I've actually got to have a different conversation with them now. And it was, I don't know why I had let myself sort of take them to it. I mean, really, really don't. I wouldn't, I don't let them see 15 films because they're not 15. Actually, one of them is, but now. But I was amazed. So that was 29. Why was I not thinking more sensibly then? I do sometimes think we enjoy art slightly superficially. It's happening to us. We're just going to experience it, and that isn't. Sometimes you want that moment. You want a completely superficial experience, and I'm just going to go. But actually, the most meaningful and the most important art is not that. And I think it's really important as an organisation, as Britten Pears Arts, that we have those conversations and we do that. I think the challenge comes around audience development, around getting people in to see it and getting new people in to see this really important work. I think that's a real challenge for us. And actually, if we're trying to get the people that have come to opera since Britain was alive, they need taking on this journey, but it's harder to do that with them because they don't want to have those conversations. Perhaps that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. We absolutely need to do it, but we need to make sure that we have these conversations and other things are written, and it's part of this context of the whole thing. It's so important, and I know I speak for the organisation in that it's important for the whole. We as a body think it's vital. It was really interesting. So the festival, the June festival this year we just had, it felt quite. There was a lot of difficult things. There was the world collapsed in Violet. And the opera Violet that we premiered. But actually that's what's important to people at the moment, and we need to reflect that. But not just the people that come. We need to try and reach more people, and that's kind of
Yeah.
That is always a challenge. I was saying to Lucy earlier, I feel it's something to do with the word opera. You know, people totally expect one thing.
Yeah, I think that.
sort of-
I mean, I think it is. It's a very tricky word to navigate because of the associations that have been made with it for many different things. And I think it's also one of the interesting things with the choices that I made in terms of how to work with the voice in The Blue Woman. That we're very conscious about. You know, there's a lot of spoken text, for instance. There isn't that much lyrical writing for the voice in the work. There are moments of lyricism, and it was a very conscious choice to, you know, actually be in dialogue with the canon and the way that the operatic voice functions in the canon and the way that it is used to depict, you know, quite extreme human experience, and to try and find a way to navigate that in a way that investigated it without as much of a kind of romanticized version of the human experience, to kind of de-romanticize it in the way that you write for the voice. And that in itself is like quite an interrogation of the operatic form, which is tricky because obviously with audiences that have been coming to see, you know, Britain, which I love, it's, you know, it's not just getting new audiences in, but it's also taking audiences that have their love of opera on a journey that maybe is taking them to works that is challenging what opera can be as well, and how opera can change and develop, and, you know, how we can investigate the use of the operatic voice and what that means. So I think there's so many interesting things that can come out of truly interrogating what the art form is and who it's for as well.
Yeah.
Well, that absolutely, and that kind of, I think we were sort of about it at the beginning of the countless depictions of women being murdered, raped on stage, and it's opera often renders that aesthetic, so that you can absorb it, you can accommodate it without too much discomfort, and that is that's how it was, and that's how it has been until very recently. And I think that is then becomes the challenge now with these conversations happening. Then how do you stage those older operas in a way that doesn't just brush that under the carpet and actually brings it to the forefront, and with the aim partly to discomfort, because it shouldn't be covered over, exactly. Or comfortable, precisely so.
I think also what you were saying touches on when you were talking about taking your daughters to Rigoletto, is that, you know, we have this normalization of the violence actually that happens in film, media, theatre, opera particularly, where actually we, you know, unless you're very actively trying to be present about it and very actively investigating what it means for this to be on stage, it is very easy with the art form to kind of go and then suddenly realize, have that light bulb moment and go, oh, okay, right. Now with all of this that has happened globally over the past 6 years, and Me Too, and the kind of the magnification of this as something that perpetuates society globally, and the female experience, it's suddenly, you know, even if you're a woman, you may not have really seen it for what it truly is before. And I think that's what's actually exciting now, is that people are seeing it and they are interrogating it, and directors are interrogating it. Like Katie Mitchell's Theodora is a perfect example of that, interrogating what it means to take those canonic works, take those, you know, problematic female narratives and deconstruct them and present them in a way that, you know, is challenging them, but is also working for a contemporary audience.
Just in terms of time passing and how things are depicted differently, it's not an opera, but I don't know if you've seen the contemporary Spielberg's West Side Story, the recent.
You know, I've not watched it yet. I know I need to watch it because I love West Side Story. I obviously love Bernstein. I've seen the original. I played Maria when I was a teenager.
Oh, really?
So I do. I know it very well, but I've not watched it yet. But I need to. It's on my list.
I would say so. But the original film, which is great, and I've seen that 100 times. And so watching the new film, that film was kind of almost like running in a split screen, you know, in my head at the same time. But the scene where Anita goes towards the end, goes to the Jets and to give them this, to try and speak to Tony, and they attack her. In the original film, it's done you kind of know what's going on, and it's quite brutal. And then Doc comes out and stops it. The way that it is done in the contemporary film is so different. They've made some absolutely conscious choices to address exactly what is happening in that room, and also the support that women give each other. I mean, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it. It absolutely broke me, that scene. I thought it was extraordinary what they did. So again, I won't spoil exactly what happens, but it is, there's some shifts of perspective. There's some extra bits that they have added in that really emphasize that what has happened to her is, and it's terrible, and that women know how bad it is.
Yes.
And I think it's remarkable, that section. I thought it was the most impressive part of the whole film. Wow. But that is 60 years on. It just really showed how that conversation has moved on, and people are listening.
Yeah. Did you feel that Blue Woman helped have more of those conversations, not just because of it in and of itself, but as it was, because people always, because it's an opera and it's called an opera, people will think about other operas that they're going. So suddenly we're talking about it in a way that perhaps hasn't been done before.
Yeah, I think so. I think one of the most important things, though, for me was that there were quite a few people of varying ages, some who I knew, some who I didn't know, who approached me after the performance or sent me messages or on Twitter or whatever, who just quite simply said, thank you so much for making this work. It really makes me feel seen. And that for me is actually the most important thing about making the work. It really is, like, just knowing that we managed to capture the truth of the experience, essentially, for women, and also that is in itself interrogating what it means to capture the experience on stage and how we do that, and to challenge that. I think every time people are making work that's anything to do with this narrative, that it has to be investigated, and we have to ask those questions of how do we have this dialogue? How do we have this conversation? What kind of space are we making for the performers? What kind of space are we making for the audience? How do we prepare our audience? How do we help our audience leave, etc.? Like, all of those kind of things are such important questions to be asking with this work, because it's such a vulnerable space, and it's a subject that people are quite often afraid to talk about. And so it's really, really important that we are constantly challenging that. And I think as people working in the arts, we have a huge responsibility to navigate that, because we are fundamentally part of that conversation. Because if one person who maybe had a certain perspective on the subject matter comes to see a production, and that's even just slightly turns their perspective, they might have a conversation with one other person, who might have a conversation with another person, who may encounter someone who has had the experience and will then know how to navigate it to be more of a support network. There's so many, long threads that this can have an effect. And so I think it's just a huge responsibility that we have if we're making this work, to make it how it needs to be made.
Absolutely. And I think it's our responsibility to make sure people come and see it. And that's the real challenge, isn't it? Because sometimes it's scary for people to come to an opera which they don't really know about operas, and it's not their thing. But also for us, in a subject matter which they're not going to sit in the theatre, eating popcorn and eating ice cream and going,
no, definitely not,
fun night out. But they still need to come. And it's trying to get that message, and whether that's through marketing or conversations like this, but to explain to them, it is really important that they see it, and they will find a place to connect with it, whether they're a man or a woman. Because they, it impacts everyone. It's not just and I think I'm quite keen that we don't just talk about it as a female story, because it's all about
it's everyone's story. Yes, it needs to be. It's really important that anyone and everyone comes. All people come.
Yeah, absolutely. And
it's talking about the responsibility and the process for the audience, but also for the performers. And I know that's something, again, that it seems relatively recently, which is making sure that your performers are looked after when they're tackling difficult subject matter. And this, you sort of think, well, of course, but it is relatively recent that has been at the forefront. Whereas I think before, perhaps with this sort of cliche of the method actor, that you have to kind of go there, and then there's no support, there's no outlet for that. They just have to just then take it home with them and deal with it by themselves. So presumably that was all part of this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean,
process.
for this particular project, like I know for Katie's Theodora, they worked with an intimacy director on that project. Obviously, because there's no depiction in any way or representation of violence in The Blue Woman, we didn't work with an intimacy director, but we did have kind of a wellness facilitator, and we had therapeutic support on hand if anyone needed that. And also it was, you know, we had a pretty much wholly female space as well for the work. Not entirely wholly female space. Our electronics designer is my long-term collaborator, Matthew Fairclough, who I work with on all my projects, and is wonderful to work with. And he very much enjoyed being in that space, I think. For the few weeks, it was a very interesting experience for him, I think, to be part of that. Did it feel
noticeably different, being all female apart from Matthew? I mean, did it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It does feel very different, and I think especially with this subject matter and what we were investigating in this subject matter, which was the female experience of this, I think it just enables people to have there is inevitably anxiety coming to this subject. It's part of making a work like this, but it enables the space to feel just that little bit safer, actually. And I think that's what's important. Anything that can make that space feel safer is absolutely vital in the consideration of making it. And so it's really important. And just things like having a female conductor are really, really important with a work like this. Because it completely changes the narrative if you have a male conductor for The Blue Woman. It's not something that would work. It has to be a female conductor for this opera because of that relationship and because of the power dynamic between performer and conductor. It's really, really important to just, because it's all representative of the experience and the female experience, and particularly in terms of power and control.
Yeah. Goodness, I would never have thought of that. Almost like a micro detail, but it's just absolutely not, is it? It's integral to the whole experience.
But on the other hand, I wonder why the conductors, they shouldn't be in that power situation. They're part of the team. Come on, guys, you're all meant to be together.
But they do have lots of power.
So you're perhaps addressing a wider issue. It strikes me that at the end of the opera, at the end of The Blue Woman, that there is consolation would be completely the wrong word, but it feels like a reparation or the beginnings that the sun is rising slightly, and that seems to be a conscious choice, and that seems to be as well part of the responsibility is to then perhaps allow your audience and your performers to then go out into the rest of their night and function, because rather than leaving them in broken bits. Or
of course, it was really important. It was a really very conscious decision to enable the final part of the work to be a space that was clearly the beginning of a journey towards some sense of hope, some sense of reparation, some sense of regaining oneself and ownership of oneself again, because it has to be. And if when you're making this work, it felt very strongly for me, for Laura and for Katie, that we made a work that, if people had this experience, they could come to this work and feel that sense of power when they left, that sense of gaining control, even if it isn't, because it's not easy. It's very difficult as a work, and it's a difficult subject matter. It's an incredibly, obviously, life-changing experience in so many ways, that it's really, really important that final scene, it couldn't ever be too hopeful, because that would diminish what the experience is. It had to be a very fine balance of giving that slight sense of control, that beginning of the journey, but without in any way diminishing what the experience is. So it was a really tricky thing to navigate, and I spent a lot of time working on that last section, trying to find that very subtle space that it exists in.
I would say you absolutely found it. It felt, I say consolation is completely the wrong word, but acceptance perhaps, which obviously has to begin that process of finding the next, whatever happens next.
Yeah, exactly.
I think I was just intrigued to ask what you're planning to do next. I know it's to do, depending on how much you can talk about it. Your bicycle piece, House of Slide, was obviously been performed this year, which is just to do with climate change.
Yes,
which is something you obviously feel very strongly about. And your next project,
so I'm working on another opera. It's with Katie again. And Sam Redway is the librettist and Zoe Palmer is the dramaturg. I'm currently working with them this week, actually, here in Snape. And the work is investigating essentially the climate anxiety of young people, of children. And it's a work that alongside it, we've created a workshop which we facilitated in Denmark because it's with a Danish company. And then that workshop has then been shared globally with facilitators in theatre groups and community groups who have then led it in their countries with youth groups and then given feedback on what the kind of children have shared within that space and the way that, because it's a very kind of, it's a very fun space that we've created for the workshop to ensure that it's also safe for the young people that are making it. And then they kind of send that feedback, and then the kind of things that have come out of those workshops are fed into the libretto, because it was really important that we tried to kind of get a sense of what the global experience was of young people, because obviously where we live in the United Kingdom, it's an incredibly different experience to what it will be in other places where it is current. It is happening right now, and it is changing the way that they live every day. And so I think it's really important that we try to capture that. And we've had some amazing conversations across the globe. In fact, we recently just had some videos back from a workshop that took place in India. And so we've been watching those videos, and it's utterly joyous to watch them in the workshop, because there's just, it's amazing work that they've been doing, and that's been feeding into the libretto. So we're working on that at the moment, which will also have bikes in. There will be bikes. There will be bikes in the piece. And that will premiere in Aarhus in Denmark in June, and then in Copenhagen in August next year.
Wow.
That's really exciting.
Very exciting.
But it also, it's obviously it must be fascinating taking a global perspective, because it's not just their immediate experience, but it's also their cultural attitude to, I don't know, I spent a bit of time in Iceland, and they seem to be so much more aware of the climate and their role in it and what they should do and how they should. And it's just sort of a much more natural cultural state there to think about it, or it's high up their agenda. It felt when I was there. And I guess it's different in different countries, isn't it?
Yeah, of course. I mean, one of the things that we learnt, and, very naively, I hadn't thought about this, and I've read a lot about it since, is that obviously we talk about the climate anxiety in young people, maybe in kind of Western Europe particularly. But obviously in certain countries where the climate crisis is very much affecting the way of life, it's affecting access to water on a daily basis and things like that, that actually it isn't climate anxiety there.
No.
Because it's already there. It's already happening. Like the anxiety here is of the future, what might happen. But it is already actually part of their lives, and so there is that difference of experience.
It's our immediate anxiety about
exactly.
We have not got enough water.
They're in
no
crisis.
Crops
Exactly. So it's really, because we really wanted to try and capture that in the work, because we wanted to, in a sense, capture the global experience in the child who is in the work, and the parents in the work are very much representative of kind of Western Europe kind of parent perspective. And it's an amazing libretto so far. I'm so excited about it, I have to say. Like, I genuinely am really excited.
Sort of places. I mean, how do you sort of, have you done it through opera houses?
No, so the way that this has come about, there's an ensemble in Aarhus called Lydenskab, and they are an ensemble that I've worked with a lot as a performer and various other ways. And when Aarhus was European Capital of Culture, one year they premiered their first opera. They commissioned a composer based in Denmark, and then they kind of were like, we want to commission something else. And they approached me about doing something. I said, well, I would really like to write something about this subject matter. And obviously Katie and I already worked together, and so I asked Katie, and she was obviously very interested because this is a very important part of her work as well, making work about the climate crisis. I should also say that Katie is directing the work remotely as well, via Zoom. So she has an assistant who's on the ground, and she's directing it remotely from the UK.
So in order not to fly.
Exactly,
right.
In order not to fly. And it's a completely no-fly project.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
completely no-fly. So everyone that's part of the project, whether it's myself, the librettist, some of the performers are from Berlin. There's absolutely no flying. It's all train travel in order to get to Denmark for the production. And also, obviously, the bikes are a very important part of reducing the carbon footprint of the work. And also making sure that the set is also has a low carbon footprint, and all of that has to be part of the work, because if you're making work about this subject matter, you have to think about it, because otherwise there are so many problematic narratives that can come out of making an incredibly carbon heavy opera touring production that is about climate change.
The irony is just too too glaring.
So hope, our plan is, hopefully, fingers crossed, is that we would like to set up a European tour, and for it to come to the United Kingdom, and it to essentially, fingers crossed, be the first no-fly opera tour, essentially. That's the fingers crossed, we'll see.
And I guess it helps as well that people are now much better at working remotely. We've sort of become.
Yeah, it's something that Katie's done before. She's worked this way, directing remotely with the Schaubühne in Berlin. So it's something that she's familiar with. I've never worked that way before, so we'll see. But she's very familiar with it.
Wonderful. Well, that sounds absolutely tremendous, and I very much hope it can come here, or we'll just get on a train.
Get on a train.
Get on a train.
In Denmark. Well, that sounds great in itself.
And a bike.
And a bike. Yeah. Yeah. Is it Denmark that you can cycle from the airport to the centre of Copenhagen?
Cycling.
Or something?
Copenhagen
That's
is
the
a
place to
big
go.
cycling city, but also Aarhus as well. Yeah.
Wonderful. Brilliant. I think we're just coming to the end now. Thank you so much for talking so articulately and brilliantly about your wonderful piece. I can't wait to see it again in September. And thank you very much, Sarah, for joining us for this conversation. It's so just to hear that all sides of it, so the organisational side of it as well as the creative side of it, because these things have to work so closely together. Just one final thing, Laura, I just was reading that you have been described as a triple threat: composer, performer, provocatrice, which is quite nice.
It's quite funny, isn't it? Yeah, I think that was Helen Wallace, that said that. Yes,
triple threat.
I do enjoy the language used in it. It was post a performance of a piece called FFF that I perform as well. It's a 30-minute work, and I did it at Huddersfield. I'm doing it again actually in Berlin in November, and it's quite a tour de force. Let's put it that way. So
fantastic. Well, thank you so much. We will be continuing this conversation in the subsequent conversations that we're having, one of which will follow and reflect on the performance of Blue Woman, and then also looking ahead to the production of Rape of Lucretia at the end of October. But thank you again to you both very much.
Thank you so much.